Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Senators, in which the Sharks managed to win 4-1. And this was a much better result than the previous game these two teams played, when the Sharks were basically destroyed by the last place Senators team 6-2. And it wasn't even that this was so much of an improvement over that game, because I don't think the Sharks played particularly well, which I don't blame them for after coming off some emotional wins against the Lightning, the Golden Knights, some big divisional games against the likes of the Oilers. You know, they come into this game, they're against a team that they're never going to see again this season, since the Senators won't be making the playoffs. They already had that whole Erik Karlsson returning to Ottawa thing, so the second game didn't really mean as much, and as such, it wouldn't have been too much of a surprise if the Sharks came out flat, and they did come out flat. And yet, when you take a look at that first game they played, in which they came out flat in that one, that was a game where their goaltending wasn't good, their defense wasn't good, and the Senators ran them over. This game they come out flat, and yet they still managed to hold the Senators to 0 goals during the first 40 minutes and take a pretty, in the end, solid win, 4-1. But the Sharks and the Senators traded blows during the first couple of periods. Senators, I feel like, got maybe a bit better chances, but not by too much. It was the Sharks who got first blood in this game at the end of the second period. Joe Pavelski with his 26th, as he continues to have himself a great season. And so coming into the third period, the Sharks once again had a lead, and once again did a pretty good job at holding it. They expanded on it with Brent Burns' goal in a game that celebrated his 1,000th. It wasn't actually his 1,000th, but it was celebrating his 1,000th. The Senators came back on the immediate next shift and got one from Dzingel, but the Sharks still held the lead 2-1. They hold it even better with Thornton's goal. It's apparently Thornton's goal at the time of this recording, but maybe it'll end up being changed to Timo Meier. No offense to Thornton, but I kind of hope it is changed to Meier just to get him off that goal drought, so that could maybe open the floodgates a bit. Sometimes it takes those dirty goals to do that, and so if it does go to Meier, it'll be his 19th, and hopefully that will help him. And then the Sharks top it off with a nice empty net from Melker Karlsson off of a pretty good play by him, and so the Sharks get 4-1, and basically is what just amounts as 2 points, but also shows the progress that they have made. You know, 2 games against the Senators where they were not at their best. The first one they get destroyed, and then the second one they end up getting a pretty solid win in general. First thing I'd like to talk about has to be Martin Jones. He picked up where he left off against the Golden Knights. He was great in that game. He's great again tonight, only lets in the single goal to Dzingel, so that ruined his shutout bid, but he was making save after save. Some solid ones. The Sharks defense once again helping him out in that regard, and so this definitely helps to justify people who were trying to say that, you know, Jones wasn't getting a lot of help defensively. He has been getting as of late, and he's been playing at a much better level, so certainly Jones has been better, but so has the defense to help him out. And so while he doesn't get the shutout, as I said, the stats do continue to improve. Martin Jones looking like the Martin Jones we know he can look like, and it's definitely a good sign moving forward that hopefully it's still a bit of a stretch, as there's still 2-3 months left of the season, but hopefully he can carry this on for the rest of the season and arrive into the playoffs immediately at playoff Jones. Next is Brent Burns. As I said, he was had his little pregame ceremony for his 1,000th game. This was actually a rather quick game through the first couple of periods. If it wasn't for this ceremony, this probably would have been over a lot sooner. But they get the ceremony, they present him with the stick and all the things. Ends up getting him like 2 antelopes as a gift, which was is weird for everybody except Brent Burns, if we're being honest. But he ends up scoring a goal in this game. He gets an assist, puts himself up to 52 points, extending that lead that he currently holds over all other defensemen. So a great offensive season for Brent Burns, but again, another solid defensive game. He led the team in ice time with over 28 minutes, even with the return of Justin Braun. Vlasic remains on the sidelines. Joachim Ryan was taken out in favor of Justin Braun, and I suspect the reasoning to keep Tim Heeden over Ryan is just to get a bit more of an offensive flair. He didn't really have that great of a game, so he didn't get too much ice time. But Brent Burns was great. He was great offensively. He was great defensively, and he continues to play at a very high level for these past few games. Next is the former Sharks. We had discussed in the previous game that the Sharks played against the Senators. It was Erik Karlsson who was returning to Ottawa. That was the huge story. The return of Tierney, Bodker, DeMello and Balcers to San Jose certainly made for a lot less of an interesting story, because those weren't like some huge stars like Erik Karlsson was, but they were returning to the tank for the first time this season, and they had some pretty good games. Bodker and Tierney certainly looking like their usual selves. Bodker setting up a couple nice plays, but otherwise not doing too much. Tierney being pretty good in the offensive zone, but sort of lacking that extra thing that would make him a real threat, but playing well defensively. I thought DeMello actually had a pretty solid game in general. And the most surprising of these former Sharks was Balcers. I don't think we actually ever saw him get a game with the San Jose Sharks. He was more with the San Jose Barracuda, so technically he was still in the arena. But I thought Balcers had a couple of good opportunities. He had already scored his first NHL goal in a previous games with the Sharks. That's probably the reason why he didn't score in tonight's game, because it wouldn't have been his first, so it wouldn't have mattered as much. But he did get a couple of opportunities. He's looking like a pretty solid prospect for the Senators, certainly looking like what I thought he would be for the Sharks, which is like that middle six forward. I don't think he really has the high-end potential, but still a decent pickup for the Senators, and so they didn't really lose the trade as much as some people thought for Erik Karlsson, although the Sharks were certainly, in my opinion at least, still the winners of that one. Finally, we have to talk about the injury scares that the Sharks have sustained in this game. Jonas Donskoi being the first one who is seemingly injured, as he got injured in the first period. He went to the dressing room, missed a couple of shifts, came back out, took a shift or two, but then didn't return for the second period. And this is, 3-4 weeks ago, I probably would have said that this could do Jonas Donskoi some good, because he was not playing well at all. But he has recently picked up his game. He was playing so well with Kane and Hertl, and so it's a huge tragedy that it ends up getting injured. He probably looked his best that he has looked since maybe 3 years ago in his rookie season, and maybe just ever in general in his career, because he was definitely playing at an extremely high level, at least for him, I should say. And so if he does get out, if he is out for an extended period of time, or even just for one more game, I assume Kevin Labanc will take his spot on that third line with Kane and Hertl. Hopefully that could energize Labanc, who hasn't been that great as of late. Labanc and Donskoi do play a similar kind of game, even if I think Donskoi is the better player, so it's not going to be a huge shift for the line dynamic. So hopefully Kane and Hertl, who again have continued to play at a very strong level, can help bring Labanc up to par. I also assume that Chartier will take Labanc's spot on the fourth line. Another big injury scare, and maybe even more so than definitely even more so than Jonas Donskoi, was the scare that Logan Couture had. His leg, he gets sort of Archibald from the Senators falls on top of him. His leg bends in ways that legs shouldn't bend, and I was having like horrible flashbacks to when Joe Thornton had a similar injury when Bodker fell on top of him. He did not play another game until the next season, and that was back last season in January, so he was out 9 months technically. And so when I saw this, I had tears in my eyes basically as I was watching Logan Couture hobble over to the bench, and yet somehow he managed to remain on the bench. I was thinking that he could be gone for weeks. I was thinking he could possibly even be gone for months. And on a team like the Sharks, who you could argue don't even have a first line center, if they lose their first line center currently of Logan Couture, it would be a huge blow to the Sharks, who have one of the league's best offense, and that would plummet, as well as Logan Couture being one of the better defensive forwards. Luckily for the Sharks, he somehow manages to remain on the bench. I know if I had sustained an injury like that, if my leg bent in that way, I probably wouldn't be able to walk again for the rest of my life. And so it definitely shows the resiliency of hockey players. And so hopefully Logan Couture can walk it off a bit at the end of this game. And with the couple of days off the Sharks do have before their next one, hopefully he'll be back, probably not 100%, as hockey players never are at 100%, but at a decent enough level to still play in that game against the Penguins on Tuesday. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action, as I said, on Tuesday against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And if they thought that this game against the Senators wasn't really one to get up for, the Penguins one will definitely be one to get up for. Of course, everyone remembers the history these two teams have. Not like it's a huge rivalry between the Sharks and the Penguins. They don't meet much as they're in separate conferences. But who can forget the Sharks lost to the Penguins in the Stanley Cup Finals just a few years back. It was the final boss, basically, that stood in the way between the Sharks and their first ever Stanley Cup, and sadly it didn't end up happening. And so while it's not a huge rivalry, it is still a team that the Sharks want to beat, especially since the Penguins, like the Lightning and the Golden Knights, who are coming into their games against the San Jose Sharks, are on a big hot streak. They're looking like they're in championship form, in the form that they were in those 2 Stanley Cup years. And so the Sharks are going to be left with another measuring stick game, a game that is not just 2 points, but is a game that, if it's not the Lightning, if I'm being honest, if it's not the Lightning that the Sharks were to meet in the Stanley Cup Finals, if they were to make it, it would probably be the Penguins, in my opinion. And so as such, it's another important game for the San Jose Sharks to try and get the 2 points in. And with Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, and Phil Kessel standing in their way, it's not going to be easy, but the Sharks will be looking for their 7th straight win. Class dismissed.